I've started.
A lot of movies put public relations figures in the spotlight, making it seem high-paced and glamorous. Would you agree with these depictions?
Yes and no. I mean, if you watch Mad Men or programs like that, they always make it sound as glamorous if they're forcing people to smoke cigarettes, that kind of thing. But there's a lot of, there are elements that are fast-paced and exciting. I mean, if you think about PR, it's the mirror equivalent of the news. So it's different every day. There's lots going on. It can be very exciting, or it can be, there's a lot of work that goes on behind the scenes.
Yeah.
So it's not all glamour, it's not all in the spotlight, even though the end result is in the spotlight. It's not always front and center. A lot of the things you do are not necessarily front page news.
Yeah.
So, but some things are front page news. So it can be very exciting. So that's what I think is interesting about PR, is that it has those peaks and valleys, if you want to call it.
I guess it also depends which field you're in.
Exactly. It depends on what game you're playing and in what arena. So if it's a national arena, I've worked on national stories in newspapers as well as PR. But then there are a lot of other stories that aren't national. They're local issues that have to be dealt with. So.
Right. What changes have you seen in the industry over the past 2 decades? And are these, do you consider them positive or negative changes?
Positive changes. I think the speed is the issue. Social media has completely changed the game in terms of journalism and PR, because issues suddenly can go national and international within minutes, if not seconds. So you've got Facebook, you've got YouTube, you have all these different issues. I think it's a positive thing in some respects, because it makes it more transparent what people are doing. The issues are more visible to not only people involved in those issues, but potentially anyone checking them out on social media. And I think in the PR field, the reason it's a positive is for students like yourselves. This is an upside. There's much more interest in public relations now in the organizations and companies and the outcome of those things. If you look at what's happened, I'll cite 3 very clear examples of the impact of social media. Arab Spring and all the revolutions in Northern Africa, that's a global issue. Occupy Wall Street, Occupy Washington, Occupy Toronto, Vancouver. That whole Occupy movement is driven by social media, and locally in KW we've had something like Save the Voters. Inside of 2 days you have 2,000 plus people on a Facebook site, and it changes the outcome. So each of those, I think, can have positive impacts. It's just the speed and the scope and how quickly things move. So there's been a major change in public relations and journalism.
And that also makes with like companies do more for us too. Like it gives them more pressure.
If they're listening, and they have to be listening these days to social media, that's the first thing I think a lot of organizations do, is they realize that there's an issue there much faster than they would. So they respond differently. And it's everything from the guy who had his guitar smashed by United Airlines, or he does a YouTube video about the incident, and suddenly it's an international story, plus they fix it. So positive outcomes.
They have to be watching all the time too.
Yeah.
What are some of your favorite PR campaigns that you might have seen or worked on, and maybe practitioners, and you feel like they really hit the nail on the head?
There are a couple issues that I think are broader than just a single individual or a single organization. The most interesting campaign I've watched is I grew up in the tobacco belt of Southern Ontario, working in tobacco when I was a child, right? 12, 13. And everybody down there smoked. But one of the most effective campaigns, I think, internationally, and especially in North America, has been anti-smoking campaigns. Governments are involved, and I think, to step back a bit, the most successful and interesting campaigns are ones where groups and organizations step into the shoes of the public. And they realize there's a greater good here to be done. So if I'm going back to Mad Men, and I was talking about them, when you look at the campaigns to get people to smoke back in the 20s and 30s, and get women to smoke back in the 20s and 30s, that was all about sales. But now it's about healthcare costs, cancer, things that are of broad public importance. And those are the campaigns I look at. In Canada, I've worked in different campaigns involving, I was in financial institutions working with them for a while, so there's a whole campaign going on in Canada, whether Canadians realize it or not, to actually get them thinking differently about money and how they manage money and pensions and all these things. So those have been fairly successful, but I still think they have many, many miles to go.
Yeah, I guess successful PR is seen as news, right?
Exactly. So there have been great PR campaigns over the years, and the best ones I would say are where there's an issue and whoever the organization is, whatever they're doing, decides we need to do something about it and actually advances.
Yeah, the ones who look at the bigger picture rather than just their product.
Exactly.
Right. What advice to students in PR program and field do you have now for when they go look for work?
I was actually talking to a class a couple weeks ago, and that's why we're doing this, I think. Three things I would highlight are planning, practice, and persistence. It's called the 3 Ps. Anyway, planning, you have to plan what you're doing somewhere along the way.
And have a backup.
Yeah, and have a focus on what you're doing. You have to actually plan, some people use the phrase, plan to succeed. Well, that's really what it is, whether it's the actual PR campaign you're doing or your own career. And a lot of what I talk about to journalism and PR classes is taking those same skills you learn in journalism and PR and applying it to your own career. So planning how to find jobs. Right now it's, depends on when your graduation is. Suddenly you get more focused on that as you graduate. So, and I think that's something that, as a student coming out of Western history, I didn't really plan how I was going to do what I did. Still, I had a career and it developed, but it might have been very different if I had actually planned out how I did certain things, whether it's how I look for jobs, how I plan for the interview. And that really, the practice of the preparation is another thing I talked about with the students recently, was just to encourage them to practice what they're going to say in an interview. Think about the questions they will be asked, plan the answers. Actually practice the answers in front of the tape recorder so they see and hear what they're saying and feel very comfortable with it. You don't want to be saying anything you're not comfortable with, so let's just make sure that you are very comfortable with what the questions and the answers are. So the last part is the persistence, and the persistence is not giving up. When I came out of Western, I had a history degree. I hit what I would say was a brick wall because of all the graduates coming out of new journalism programs after the Watergate scandal in the United States, a lot of new investigative reporters, a lot of new, so people at the Western Gazette, where I was traditionally had gone to the Globe and Mail, the Spectator, CBC, those kind of things. Suddenly, everyone just kind of went off a cliff, at least so we thought. And so a lot of us had to adjust our expectations. We weren't going to Globe and Mail, we weren't going to CBC, we went to weekly newspapers if we stayed in journalism at all, and a lot of us did. And so then we just moved around, spent 3 months here, 6 months there, a year and a half there. And that's exactly what I did. So I went through 5 newspapers in 20 years. I spent about 15 here at the Record. It was a great place to work. And build a career. So, and it goes in steps, right? It's not like you're going to come out like this, you come out of the side of the Death Star in Star Wars or whatever, and suddenly be at the center of the universe. It doesn't work that way.
It's a process.
So it takes time to look at where you're going, and patience, and the ability to take a few steps to go where you want to go and shape your own career too. Like that's the other thing is I feel very good that over the years, I'm really glad I worked at small weekly newspapers. I learned more in Exeter, Delhi, Simcoe, like these small towns about newspapers than I ever would have learned maybe sitting at the Globe and Mail writing my own story for the Globe and Mail. Now, it would have been great too, but just a different path. So there are all kinds of different paths in careers, right? That's something that I didn't understand coming out. Like a lot of people in journalism think, oh, I need a journalism degree to do it. well, I'm a walking example of somebody who has a history degree, but done all kinds of other education and training for whatever I'm doing, but I do not have a journalism degree. Yet I worked in newspapers for 20 years. So the skills aren't just, ask me that.
Can you describe PR in one line?
In one line, I'd say it's building and protecting your reputation and relationships with a wide range of audiences. So that's really the first, that's how I would describe it. Now, what that means, and it's so different day to day, even what organizations work with. But the second part of it, you need to be a strong communicator, because you have to actually build some understanding on issues, whatever it is. And you want to get to specific objectives, goals, and reach those goals, whatever they may be. In some cases, they can be sales and convincing women to smoke cigarettes, or to convince people not to smoke, right? So those are the types of goals on a high level. And then the other thing is you're working in the public interest, whether it's regardless of what organization it is. So it's two-way communication, and I think that's the other big change is when social media has changed that two-way communication. It goes back and forth.
Go ahead.
Okay. So what kind of skills, writing and skills like that, do you think you need to be in public relations? You can edit that part.
Well, we were talking about this earlier, and I think people skills, when I say people skills, the ability to talk to people is huge. Writing is one element of it, and certainly an important part. But the ability to relate to people and build those relationships over a long period, that's a huge part of it. And I've seen different people have different skills. Some are not great writers, but they're very good PR people. Some are not great people. Their writing only carries them so far, so they have to work at it. And the biggest thing is being able to recognize what you need to work on. And as an individual, as a student, as a PR practitioner, what are the things that I need to do to be successful at getting that job done? Same with journalists. I mean, journalists have the same kind of challenge. Right?
We're basically on the same boat if you think about it. Like,
Yeah, exactly.
even though we're so opposite, we're still on the same boat. Like, we're looking for the same kind of jobs, but us with a wider range. Is that right?
That's right, the communications jobs. And it's quite interesting because a lot of people see, like I describe it as the mirror image, but it's even not even that. It's just, it's the same type of skill set. And I used to literally sit down and write a news story. But when I was working in newspapers, I never thought of the story as being the end result. Like, it was not just getting that story written and published in the paper. It was the actual finding out what's going on, getting to know who's involved, building. I mean, you have to build trust with people as a journalist.
Your reputation.
Yeah, it's all credibility.
Yeah.
If you look at, going back to the one line about PR, if I was to boil it down to one word, is credibility. Because if you do not have credibility with whoever you are, it doesn't work.
Even when it's not on even just your profession, like
Yes.
on your day-to-day life, if you don't have credibility, that's it.
So if I was to look at my own career and say, okay, well, yeah, I have 20 years in newspapers, so I'm good at media relations, well, that's not necessarily going to be true. And you don't necessarily have to have that 20 years in media to be good at media relations. You have to be able to put yourself in their shoes and understand what their daily pressures are, what they're doing, what their job is. And to have that kind of broader perspective of how you talk to someone. Whether it's a journalist, whether it's a member of the public. I mean, it's very interesting how, it's actually the same regardless of who it is. I mean, if you think about it, a single conversation with a single person can suddenly go global just as fast as me talking to somebody from Global.
It's true.
And then it suddenly becomes an issue everywhere.
It's true.
So, you have things as goofy as, there were some employees at Domino's Pizza who did this goofy video for YouTube. It became an international incident. And it's, next thing you know, the CEO of Domino's is on television trying to apologize, they fire the employees, it goes on.